All right. So like I said before, a lot of what this discussion is going to be about today is kind of be discussing some of the projects that you guys are kind of undertaking this year and kind of into the future, and how rebreathers are going to be a critical tool for the kind of diving that you guys are going to be doing, using back mount rebreathers, side mount rebreathers, bailout rebreathers, and habitat rebreathers.
Yep.
So which I think it's really exciting to see the technologies just kind of being used on all the different aspects of the dive, and also how rebreathers are still only one part of the diving that you guys are doing. It's one, I don't want to say one failure point, but it's one of the big logistical issues that you guys undertake on some of these dives. So
yeah, and really what makes what we've done and what we're doing possible.
Right.
You know,
right.
This morning I put a video on from 1996.
Uh-huh.
And that was an impressive video back then. So yeah,
a little bit of history.
Just what we're doing now, we just couldn't do with that technology. So.
Yeah, and it really wasn't that long ago, and so it's which it's really great it's good to see the kind of the leaps and bounds in the technology. And something that I always really want to iterate is that you guys this isn't your full-time job to be doing this kind of diving. There are firms around the world that their main focus is diving, and you guys are all volunteers. You guys kind of do all of this, everything out of pocket. So
sure.
The logistical endeavors are not possible without the volunteers, the work that goes in, the donations to the organization. Us as manufacturers, we like to see how we can support and help this, because it's we're all in the same neighborhood. We're all it's a big community. So
and how fortunate we are to live in a place where the frontier, the frontier that we're exploring is available. And I think about that. Sometimes I wake up and I'm like, how lucky I am to have a place like Weeki Wachee and Line Eater and the other things. I mean, without a frontier, I mean, how do you aspire to go further and push harder and stuff? And in Europe, there's so many of those. So we're fortunately, to have that opportunity here.
Exactly. I mean, and we've had you on the streams before, and we talked about the that there's still a lot of cave being discovered.
Oh yeah.
And so I mean, big shout out to the guys that are laying line up in Peacock.
Yeah, absolutely.
So those guys that are doing that work, Teddy and Steve.
Yeah.
We're like, it's
where is Hill 400?
Stay tuned.
That's got to be a future episode.
That's right.
But it's waiting for the tattoo. Really,
it's such a popular cave, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so it's probably one of the most popular caves in the world. And same with Ginny. Sure. Yeah. And there's line being laid there, and and then here in Florida, Eagle's Nest, Weeki Wachee, some of these more permit access sites, but you still have line being discovered all over.
Something that was so nostalgic about what they're doing in Peacock 3 right now is we were on a trip last month, and I get a phone call from Mark Long, and then a week or two later I get a phone call from Woody Jasper.
Oh yeah,
and all the guys who had to do not just including those two, they calling me and going, hey, tell us what's happening at Peacock 3. I mean, they're just still, the fact that they haven't been doing that type of diving in decades, but they're just kind of like,
what's going on?
And immediately I think Steve was in the car with me, and I go, hey, Mark, you don't know this guy, but this, and I handed, and Mark and Steve just started talking immediately. There was this kind of like,
this energy about it.
And the rest of us sitting in the car going like that.
Put on speaker.
Exactly. And so.
Well, the Sheck Exley, wasn't that him who did the Taming of the Slough?
Taming of the Slough, yeah.
So I don't know, if you're a cave diver or cavern diver, there's no way you don't know about Peacock.
Or the history of, technical diving.
Sure.
And so it is really cool to see something that's growing and growing and growing.
Yeah.
And, and also a lot of the diving that you guys are doing, it's the tip of the spear. The same thing with Andy and Charlie. Like a lot of that diving, it's very, very fringe diving, especially the folks over in Pierce Resurgence, the Wet Mules. They're doing some awesome diving, and so
Pozo Azul,
right,
quite a few other places.
Yeah, and so it's really incredible to just kind of be seeing that kind of diving. And I think it's so cool that the social media and the live streams really allow us all to kind of connect across the world and to kind of share the stories. And you get firsthand, you hear it from the horse's mouth of everything that's going on, and so it's just very cool. It's an exciting time, I think.
Absolutely,
yeah, for sure.
It's true.
So
I have to make two observations just real quick, and I'm sure we're going to dig into this a little bit. But, I called you the other day. We talked about it in person. This is an underwater explorer. This is not an underwater explorer. This is a guy that accidentally explored underwater. Two different creatures.
Well,
this guy doesn't go to bed or wake up without thinking about landlines somewhere.
You've had your neck and a lot of stuff. You've explored at Wiki. You've extended the end of the line at Eagle's Nest with James. So
yeah, but I mean that's to me, I'm just like, hey. I guess we'll lay some line here and then maybe survey in 6 or 8 years.
Anybody that endeavors to explore has to be a little stupid, so I'm just more stupid than you are. So.
Okay, I'm certainly not going to argue with you anymore after that.
I think cave divers are our own species. And so, and then like within rebreathers and within all of that. And so it's very much like you have the access here, there's the caves here. And so now you have the technology, and we've talked about that before in our Bailout series, of where the technology is catching up to where the skills are, and it's just different aspects of it. And now it's new kinds of problems. Like like something we'll be discussing today is a lot like configuration to the environment. How do we shape the equipment to best suit the environment, and how we react during duress in the environment, because the primary goal for diving is to be able to come back, right? Nobody plans to have a bad day. And that's also part of the close call series that we talk a lot about, are those lessons that we learn when there's a fatality, but when there's a close call, when nothing was damaged, no one got hurt, but it was definitely a lesson learned.
Yeah, and the environment really dictates the usability. I mean, even in this particular unit or some of the ones we're using, I mean, they're applicable for those systems, but to try to take that and go into an open water deep wreck or something like that, I mean, you're not talking about changing major things, but it's important, not one configuration fits every environment, because ultimately the environment dictates that application, because it's always changing.
And this environment's unforgiving. So
yes,
yeah, and also system specific. I think is kind of what he's talking when he says environments.
Exactly. Yeah. Correct. Exactly. System specific, and so I always take a look at my notes to make sure.
Go ahead, look at your notes. I'm gonna give my second disclaimer.
Yeah.
A lot of theory and theoretical discussion and future use today. I don't want to mislead anybody, just to be fair, because some people have reached out to me, and this has been used by me for 3 hours, as a bailout unit and test. Right. Certainly not going to discuss how you can go home and do it.
Exactly.
Talk a lot about Brett's ideas and why they're probably better than mine, and then my ideas, and then Joe's going to tell us all we're wrong, and then Divesoft's going to call him later and say, no, you can't do that, right?
But then we're going to figure out, okay, well, what works here, what works there, and so that's an important thing to know, is that it is very much we're just kind of in the early phases of utilizing kind of this particular technology, and how it can be applicable, because it'll fix a lot of like problems.
I think that's key. That's what applicability today for sure.
We've been talking about this conversation for a week, and we've had many hours, way more conversation than we'll have time to do today.
Right.
It's only even barely scratched the surface, because you still got to go in and do the work.
Exactly.
You still got to go do the work.
And there is a big disconnect that comes in when you have communities and people, especially speaking online, where they're kind of saying like, well, I would do it like this and I'm perfect all the time and every time. Yeah. And it's very different than how it actually plays out in the water. And, because there you have, like I said, there's so many other factors: cold, narcosis, depth, travel, fatigue. The duration that you guys are diving, it's an endurance race. And so, and not even a race, but it's an endurance trip.
So, marathon, not a sprint, ideally.
Yeah.
And so, there's certainly some specific application that I'm excited about. I don't want to. I don't know where to start. You got a script that I was just getting ready to dig in. Brett and I only want you to start the script so we can go off script. So will you hurry up and do that?
Exactly.
But to touch on what you said, so many, we don't forget as rebreather divers, but I mean, the thermal properties of being on a rebreather are so, I use this word a lot today, applicable, because, open circuit dives back in the day, you had to have heat. These days on whatever rebreather I'm on, I usually, and of course, according to the Europeans, we're diving in bathwater here.
Oh, I know, right? It's unbelievable.
But still,
and yet I saw them with blue gloves the other day.
We talk about gas extension and exploration, but just the thermal properties and staying warm
and moist
to this. Oh my gosh!
So then, tell me, what are the kind of the projects of the diving that you're looking to utilize the rebreathers in, or like a bailout rebreather in?
Well, almost everything we can, and I think it's really important that before you go to any particular cave, so if we're looking at Chaplain or we're looking at Line Eater or a river cave, I don't always go rebreather.
Yeah.
Even like, I'll tell people, let's just do some reconnaissance, because once again, you look at that and you shouldn't not use open circuit. There's just so I think, once again, you just need to take that into consideration,
right,
where you are and what you're doing.
When you asked that, did you mean like primary or bailout or anything?
So exactly, yeah, specifics.
Okay,
Okay. So like, what's the site that you're focusing on, and then why a rebreather?
Well, currently, I think the primary sites are Line Eater, which is the third longest underwater cave system in the world right now.
Right.
Next to Falmouth, and then next to Wakulla, and then next to Pozo Azul, even though it sumps quite often. And obviously, because of the depth and duration of that dive, the depth not so much. I think our max depth is 180. Our average depth across the board is like 138. But those dives are over 16 hours long. But the difference with those is we're literally scootering. We're literally on the DPV for 7 solid hours.
Wow. Yeah.
So
7 hours of scootering.
Yeah. So thermal is a big problem there. The water isn't very cold, but when you're scootering for 7 hours, you're in the zone. You're not really feeling it, but that water's constantly moving over you and being on that rebreather. So, and
Line Eater specifically, I haven't done much there. It's a little geographically challenging for me, but I can tell you that when we were discussing it, not incredibly deep, but obviously very far. But the setup is amazing. You're going to pick up the phone, you're going to call, and you say, "Hey, we need somebody to do a setup." The first scooter drop at 12,000 feet.
Wow.
So how many people can you pick up the phone?
That's a setup dive that's bigger than what most people will do.
Right now.
So now you want a rebreather, because how are you going to get all the bottles that you need between 12 and 28,000 feet?
And this is another system where we have a habitat at 70 feet, 2,200 feet into the cave.
Wow. And
then we have another habitat at 20 feet, and both of those habitats are scrubber CCR prepared. We actually have a Mickey phone running from the habitat at 70 feet, 20. So we literally have surface to surface communication.
Is it like a bone phone?
Yep. Yeah, it is. So we're excited about using that. So,
that's fun. Yeah. We used to use both bone phones at NASA, but there was so much metal around. It was garbled most of the time.
I haven't seen that one, but I've seen some of the other ones that we use. And then we discussed the other day, not switch sites, but at Wiki, we have, or Twin Ds, we have the the live streams you can do, because it's you can get
the habit chats. Yeah, exactly. So you guys should definitely tune in and see some of those videos you guys have posted online. So yeah, so very exciting dynamic talking, like divers talking in a bubble underground,
and with an echo too.
With an echo,
yeah, that's much better.
There's a handful of other systems right now we're utilizing that technology, but I think those are the two big ones. If I had to guess, there's some systems on the
Line Eater and Wiki, right?
Line Eater, Wiki, Finnell's Funnel, which is another one that's really long. That's about 14,000 feet. Average depth's about 120. Max depth.
So it's not necessarily very, very deep, but it's very long.
Very long. And it would. Finnell's Funnel would be another one. We would utilize a bailout rebreather, and I'd imagine that'd be a really good one. We're waiting to get back in there. So
now, what do the logistics look like on a dive that has that type of distance? Because with rebreathers, you have factors of the cave's profile, and how does that apply to how the dive plan is made? If you have a sawtooth profile, you're going to be going through a lot of your diluent gases a lot faster. If you're sitting on the trigger the entire time, now you're looking at battery durations of scooters and whatnots, and so as well as thermal issues. And so how would that dive look like on open circuit compared to on closed circuit?
Well, Bob, go ahead.
Circuit?
Impossible.
Sure. Yeah, no. Well,
Unscheduled is how I would think of that open circuit.
It just needs so much setting up and so much time comparably, I mean.
If we're trying to, if the thought is, and I'm trying to understand your question, Joe, are we trying to say, why is it a better tool for rebreathers? I mean, because open circuit would be utterly ridiculous to contemplate. I can't even.
I mean, that's a good answer.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know how you would. I mean, sure, we can do the math.
At an average depth of 128, we'd probably be running bottles every 2,000 feet. You'd have to have a lot more, heat, battery packs, things like that, for thermal. And just once again, setting that up, I mean, so we're 14,000 feet out, even if we're having 121s, at the end, maybe the last 3,000 feet, and then everything from that all the way back to the door, you'd have to have divers to set that. And then, of course, you have to tear it down, which is, we've all done it. I mean, not just Bob, but I mean, our tear down dives are, that's something that, this type of technology and the side mount CCRs we're using now, it eliminates that, not to mention the expense. I mean, most of the bottles we pull out of these systems are condemned when they come out. I mean, we can salvage, and Bob does a lot of our regulator repair and stuff. But I mean, it's an expense. I mean, there's thousands of dollars of wasted aluminum at the end of every season. In some cases,
you get $7 back for a scrap aluminum that you don't cut in half. I mean, it's like
at least the metal ones you can make a grill. You can make that little hibachi grill.
I'm getting rich.
Make a bunch of cookie jars.
I took $100 and I turned it into $7. I'm making progress.
No, but I mean, so. But, I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole. So reel me in. I was just talking with Dr. Pitkin, Andy Pitkin this morning, and we still, I mean, on our team right now, we've got myself, Andy, Charlie, Bob, and Gary, and Michael Barnett, who Michael could do exploration if he wanted to. He's certainly in that
videos are just so good.
But I'll tell you, the videos.
He doesn't need a boat.
I know, I want to keep him on video.
You got to remember that the video that we're shooting is, in most cases, more logistically challenging than our exploration dives.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, wouldn't you agree? I mean, really.
Aside from the drawing, which we all know my drawing skill does not even come close to that. But other than the drawing, I would say that the exploration is much easier. Caves going that way, they lay the line out, hit the azimuth.
And we've both done video. I mean, it's just, they're so complex, getting.
And you got to go so slow. And Barney's always yelling at you to slow down.
Yeah. But I mean, I think that's the greatest success we've had as an organization is documenting places so far and so deep so that people can see it, because Bob's been to Mount Doom, 8,300 feet back, 400 feet deep, taking photos.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
my favorite photo shoot.
I don't do it. They go, you want to go on a photo path? I'm like, no.
Sounds like it sucks.
Knock yourself out.
Oh my gosh.
So this is not a leadership thing, but one of the things that is always interesting to me, and we've talked about it, is what makes KUR strong as an organization or a group, really, because it's just a group of 50 people, right? Is the differences of the 50. Right. Like I say, he's an explorer, and he is an explorer, and he's a wild ass thinker, right? You want to find a box and put bread in it, forget it. It ain't gonna happen.
Not gonna happen.
And then you got Andy's, who's world-class tinkerer, and then you got Barney, who's legitimately one of the best freaking videographers, and Kirill, and it's like none of them get excited by the same thing. That's the beauty of it, right? Yeah. But we're all kind of, as a base, we're excited about what we're doing, right? And I like my piece. I never thought I'd like a photo shoot. I put up the first photo shoot we ever did as kind of like a joke, because in the background you got Derek Ferguson upside down, and Jesus knows what he's doing upside down in the photo. I mean, he's literally upside down in the photo. And the first photo shoot I did, I was like, and then, I looked at the pictures and I was like, I look like hammered shit, right? So then I was then that just inspired me. And now I'm not gonna say it's my thing,
so you can look sharp.
But I really enjoy it. And then, the line that I laid, sure, that was fun. But what was fun to me was taking Kirill back there and getting photos of the line that we did. I was like, we didn't find it. I mean, we all knew that passage was there. We'd blown by that big old battle plane.
Nobody saw it till you guys experienced it.
Then we get to do the photos, and it's like, it's like complete picture to me.
Right. I mean, it sits and it kind of, you almost study the section rather than exploring. You're kind of like, okay, let's do the distance. But here you're kind of studying this spot.
Yeah.
And so
I still like video dives. I think our first HD video dive, the deepest and first HD video dive was Barrowland Tunnel, which you can see on Andy Pitkin Vimeo if you want to check it out. Right. And that was so exciting for me to go, and when we, I think we did, I went with Andy and Matt, but it's exciting to catch high def images and stuff.
Yeah.
But logistically it's so difficult. But like, as Bob was saying, like in our organization, we have these people with these different goals and we all support them to try to get them to where they are. But it's tough. It's great to see, but we still, we have people who want ultimately to do that when you're part of this group is you do what you need to do, equipment wise and training wise. But ultimately it's just something you got to grab it. You got to take it.
Yeah.
You got to be a part of the organization. And so that's exciting to me.
That's what a lot of things I've kind of been thinking about is like, nothing gets handed to you. You got to take it. If you want to go do that P3 dive and you're in KUR, then you pick up the phone and you call Steve Lambert or Jefferson or Teddy. They're not going to call you.
Right.
No,
right.
no.
They're so focused on the work that they're doing. And so,
Joe, I don't mean to bring it back, but you probably wanted to talk about.
No. So to kind of bring it, I'm steering us, right? So,
not that I'm taking it. I'm just like, I thought we were talking about this stuff.
So when we're talking about the logistical advantage of the rebreathers and these dives, so does the rebreather bring new type of problems? Does it bring, or does it fix more problems than it?
I think. And I'm going to let Brett, because he's going to have way more detailed information, but this is the way I thought of it the other day when I was using it. I have one of these. It's on my back, and I have all of those same problems that the rebreather brings if you have a rebreather and you use it, right? And everybody knows what everybody says about all the negativity about it, right? Well, guess what? Just added a second one.
Yeah, you just doubled the type of task loading and the work.
That son of a gun's not even in my mouth being constantly monitored.
Right. It's just there. It's the parachute.
Yeah. So I would say that, I think you're like, does it bring its own logistical problem? Well, yeah. Right. But like anything, the cost benefit.
Right.
And the benefit of having a bailout rebreather is far advantageous to the negative pieces.
Right.
Especially when you realize that after the first couple of minutes, and I'm just monitoring both and looking at it, and this unit specifically is way smarter than anybody who ever uses it. It
has the potential.
It's not that hard. It's not that hard to do. It's going to outthink you every time. I mean, I just read the directions on the bailout use, right? We were discussing today, and I was like, I didn't know it did that. The two features that I didn't realize that it did when I read the directions. Be that as it may, I thought it was basically the same as carrying an 80 and a regulator around my neck.
Right.
So from a platform, it's no different than what we essentially do. Right.
And I think that's that. So I think really that's the best way to configure it, because you kind of have this open circuit mindset, and then you're introducing a rebreather as a tool, or you have a rebreather mindset where you're utilizing another rebreather. So it's a different kind of mindset rather than like your rebreather diving or your open circuit diving using a rebreather. And that all kind of plays into kind of the philosophy of how you're configured, how you're embarking on the unit.
So I just, I'm like a block and tackle, just like how can I make something as simple as possible. So that's kind of how I saw it. The biggest challenge I found, which was kind of interesting, was, hey, one more gas base to manage, right? We talked about that.
Right.
So I didn't have enough shit going on. Now I got one more gas base to manage. It's not even an active gas base. Right.
Versus.
So, but what do you think? I mean, in terms of logistics of it, the advantages.
I think as someone who's always thinking about going further, staying comfortable, is when the learning curve gets in the way of progress, because I always want to be progressive. But good example, and I was talking to Andrew Pitkin this morning about this when we did our last dive in the Line Eater. We're 25,000 feet back, and we're doing a shared bailout CCR, and it's a very reliable unit, the one we were using. But I'll tell you, I've never been so focused on knowing where my buddy was, even with the full, I mean, and we would stop in, where
just to clarify, that didn't replace your 120 bailouts.
Absolutely.
Right. I know. I'm just worried.
It definitely replaced a myriad of 80s that should have been the case. Sure. And so, that being said, when a nuance hampers the progression of doing it, because there has to be some, learning curve and stuff like that, which is, we'll talk a little bit more about that. But, so that's a big thing for me. We always talk about, progression. Sure. However we do it. Yep. And I think, once again, we're CCR divers, I think the mindset of like, well, it's just another CCR, we'll be good and just go, we'll talk about some things here shortly, transitioning environment,
right?
These aren't things you should take for granted. So I guess the question is if you're going to utilize Bailout CCR, keep that mindset. Practicing is one thing, but using it in a scenario is another. We've all suffered from that. So that's all. That's what I think about. I want to keep having progress. But at the same thing,
I think Jason Richards was one of the ones that talked about it, and some other guys where it can't, what you're using can't be a distraction from what you're doing.
No,
right?
No, and so we need to ask ourselves this question: like a unit like this, we discussed this earlier, has so many features. But in this particular facet, if it's just for bailout, and it's at that moment, we won't talk about decompression, we won't talk about what it can do, we won't talk about all the nuances for that bailout feature. Let's get it to that. So when we transition to it, we know it works. Yeah. We're not questioning anything else. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people who will get into this type of technology are gonna, they need to look at it from that, regardless of whether or not you're a deep wreck diver or something like that.
Right.
If your idea is to, have it that way, my suggestion would be to rethink it.
Right. Like, how necessary is it for the kind of diving that you're doing?
Correct.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you guys both have had a lot of different experience on different side mount rebreathers.
Yeah.
And so more so than this one. And you've talked about it lots of times before that they're, your primary units are the units that y'all are using. This is on the complete opposite end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
Yeah, the dumb end of the ruler versus the smart end of the ruler. Is that what you're talking about?
Right. Not calling something dumb or smart.
No. But the Fathom, for instance, is the dumb end of the ruler. It is totally mechanical.
Right.
There's bells and whistles amount to a shearwater.
Exactly.
And every I say American because
But then again, the act of metabolizing oxygen is a pretty dumb ruler thing.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to, but once again, if today's conversation is about specifically, bailout, I think that's important to address it as such, because that was a lot of the discussions I was having with some of the other guys, because this year my intention is to use this. Currently the team is using an RB80.
Right.
And of course, we wouldn't talk too much about the RB80, but you plug it in and it goes, and it's very diluent dependent.
Right.
So during a portion of the dive on the RB80, you have to have gases that have incrementally the correct amount of oxygen.
Exactly. It's another factor that plays into it.
Correct. It's a factor, but it vents water easy, and so going to it. So the question is we're focused on exploration. We're focused on scooters. You talked earlier about linear. And going further, the same thing. We're burn testing scooters now with 1,700 hour battery packs with internal Bluetooth monitoring. Because when you put a scooter down and you're 20,000 feet out, it'd be nice to have something where you can go, yeah, it's still good. That's good. Now let's go.
That'll give you that warm feeling.
Right? Think about the relevance between that.
Yeah.
Before it would take 6 scooters, and now we're using 3. And for me, my heart beats in my chest when I'm like, you just run a scooter for 16,000 feet and you put it down and you go, man, I sure hope that does 16,000 feet the other way.
But the funny thing, and that's a great point, but the funny thing is you're already there.
You're already there.
Yeah. So if you hit the button and you check it and it goes 0%, you're like, well, I'm already here.
That's good.
What am I going to do now?
But in a lot of my other talks, it's impossible to move forward if that's there.
Those chattering monkeys that I've always heard. You're just thinking about
British term. If it's still niggling in your mind, you're like, oh, and you're trying to watch the cave. Yes, and it's the same thing with these. I don't want to jump ahead. But.
So he brought up a point, and I think he said it politely, but it was in there, right, about the complexity as it relates to handing it off to switching it to be able to be used as a rebreather, right?
This particular model.
Right. Because going from a bailout unit to the primary use unit, there's a transition between the function. And I don't disagree with what he's saying, but I read the directions, so I know everything now. I read it twice. Right. So, you going to say something about it? Go ahead.
You got it.
I was impressed because we talked about how, you can, once it's in bailout mode, then you put it at the set point, right? So it calculates deco based at your set point like a standalone would for all intents and purposes.
And the set point should be relative to your what? in bailout mode.
But hold on, the set point is not the set point of the solenoid. The set point is a set point just like if you ran
if you've got the solenoid activated.
No.
Okay.
The two are divorced.
Right. So when the unit's in the bailout configuration, the set point or the solenoid is not going to fire.
Okay, I believe you.
How do we differentiate those two things? Because it does deco based on the O2 set point that you program.
So it's tracking,
but it
your
doesn't fire. Right.
Got to look at your audience.
Right. Yeah. No,
staring deeply into Bob's eyes.
Don't forget your audience. This is intense.
Go ahead.
So it's performing as it's
in bailout mode.
I'm tracking where I was. So when the unit's in bailout mode, the set point that you're telling your computer exactly, it's going to be the same as your other unit. So it knows what set point that you're flying the other unit in, as well as tracking your decompression. So it's so important that it knows what mix that you're breathing. So it's a giant standalone computer as it's monitoring, and it's also monitoring the loop partial pressure of oxygen, but it knows it's ready to be in standby. So if I jump onto the unit without pushing any buttons, and then I start breathing on the unit, I start increasing the PO2 on the maps, and then the unit's going to jump into ECCR mode. And so it'll be there ready for you without me going to the computer and kicking it into ECCR mode.
So all you got to do is breathe.
Right.
But I'll play the antagonist. Is it really necessary for a bailout version of this rebreather to be in that exact thing? I mean, once again, if I hand you this unit and via the HUD or whatever, I mean, you're going to be exhaling, first of all, a breath of gas into that either from OC.
Because divers they're going to like we've already talked about how they're going to transition to open circuit.
They should in most cases.
Because going from a rebreather failure to another rebreather typically doesn't give you that quick fix.
Yeah, and we all agree that the most likely time for this thing to fail is when you're transitioning to it or checking it at some interval.
Right.
Statistically, wouldn't you agree?
I mean, I would. I was laughing because the comment on the screen, and he told me not to read the comments, and son of a gun if I don't look and see one from Kurt.
Yeah, also for those viewing, we also have a television here, so we can see your comments here that
comment
you guys
away.
Are chiming in. So yeah,
some of you challenged to ask stupid questions. I dare you.
But but we were talking about that last night. So go ahead.
I'm trying to grasp what not your point or not your.
It's not
problem,
a point I'm making. I'm just saying. I would have more peace of mind. So once again, as an explorer, as a guy that does what I do, I get more peace of mind by partitioning things.
Okay.
And I have had solenoid stick. I know the technology has changed a lot, but in my mind, if you're going to hand me something and it's in a semi-dormant state but still functioning, once again, it doesn't have to be checking all these things. But you hand me something, my mindset's always going to be on making sure it's good on an interval.
Right.
But I'll have more ability to partition that and do what I need to do if I just don't know. I mean, as a manufacturer on this particular unit, go, oh, well, it'll do this and the solenoid won't fail. But, if anybody knows my diving, I come from a background of, mechanical CCRs, and they're really not that difficult, which is why today, like I said during this conversation, we're specifically talking about a bailout. We've mentioned transition.
Right.
And my point is, I'm not saying that we're setting a standard for this, but I think it's good. In that transition, is it necessary, or are you feeling more empowered to receive a unit that you're absolutely sure is good? You just get it, the HUD's there, whatever,
boom,
and it's working versus getting a unit that's already kind of, I don't know.
But see, I'm not understanding what you're saying.
Do solenoid failures still ever happen?
Oh, I'm sure, of course. And as cave divers alone, we plan for the failures to happen, and how do we respond to them? And all the training.
So, but if it fails, to Brett's point, you have a manual ad valve,
of course,
and you have a way to isolate the bottle and stuff like that. But in that bailout mode, I'm just saying during that transition, I think it's going. My opinion may change. I'd rather, we'll talk about later how I intend to run it now. But that's all. That's all I'm saying.
So speaking of failures, and so kind of talking about problems that you guys encounter. So on these types of duration dives, these deep dives, what kind of failures do you guys run into? Like,
we talked about that.
A tear in a wrist seal is a pretty catastrophic failure.
I think the biggest rebreather failure,
and it doesn't have to be just
but I think it's important right now is our O2s are a dedicated first stage. Any CCR diver knows that. Even if you have a sealed, IP sealed first stage or a balanced first stage, you're not running a second stage on there, so you have to run an OPV.
Right.
And so we've had multiple dives where as we drop to depth and the IP is increasing, that OPV will let loose and not reset. And the moment you lose your oxygen, you really reduce, your
range.
You suddenly go to a semi-closed,
you got a PSCR.
Right. We're working, I was just talking to Charlie the other day, we're working on things to address that. But I think that's the one big one on the dives we've experienced, is that. I'm trying to think other failures,
people have had, if you just talk about it in general, of course you got wrist seals, you get back to deco, and one of the ones that's like sometimes it's too late to manage is you've done the whole dive and now you don't have any heat.
Right.
And I think the other one too is just normal blow by that means, spit and whatever.
Water,
and it gets in there, and the next thing you know, you're just about to exit from a dive and go into a very long decompression, and you go heads down or you make some maneuver and your rig's not flooded, but you've got about a cup of water in there that you weren't sure, and the next thing you're like, and so you're like, dealing with that. Once again, is that a failure? No, but then again, you're trying to get the unit, behave. Not this. Once again, I'm not discussing this, but so that's about it for me.
Right. And what's interesting that I'd like to chat about is the configuration that you guys are doing a lot of this type of diving.
Sure.
You're not configured with you don't have 3 bottles on one side. You basically are side mounting 2 large steel cylinders. You guys are using low pressure 120s and with a high fill on.
You're talking about a normal set and a back mount configuration?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so you're configured with this. You have 2 large bottles. Then you have a bailout rebreather. It's like kind of stacked on top. And then you also have your scooters. So you have one primary scooter, maybe you're towing another scooter.
Typically.
And that's if you're not taking bottles or traveling with bottles.
Yeah, that would be a pretty light start, would be just your 2 primary bailouts, a scooter, a secondary scooter. That would be
any bottles we're moving at that point are already into the cave, and we would be moving them.
It's pretty funny how casual they're like. Oh yeah, it's just it's
but
a light
that
load.
Would be unusual.
And it's like and that's a big load, I think.
Yeah.
And so especially working in caves where sometimes you're going through restrictions.
Yeah.
And granted, some of those caves are a little bit bigger.
KUR was the first group to actually start doing that, where we would have back mounted CCR. And because we had already kind of perfected side mounting large steel cylinders, that was the next evolution for us. I'm not bragging, but, because once again, it's what it was. It was an evolution. Right. And we talk about frontiers. That's what we needed.
Yeah. And
a lot of great divers came in. They were like, oh, well, I just can't. But you have to remember, we're using press steel 121s, but our gas is, once again, 887. They're so close to heliox, it's not even funny. So a tank that would normally be negative is still, almost neutral.
Yeah.
But that's, I must say, you have your side mounted your back mount on our big long dives that are real deep. We'll, instead of having 3 liters on each side, we'll have 50. So we'll have a 50 of suit inflation gas and a 50 of O2 on one side.
They said suit inflation.
That's huge.
Yeah.
Obviously, especially at 400 and 300 feet.
That's something I kind of want to jump into, right? You're at
he says that casually, and everybody's
exactly. Everyone's like, 400 feet.
Where's the dill?
Yeah,
right.
400 feet. Yeah.
Oh yeah, a 13 won't hit maybe 3 or 4 shots on a 13, and you're done.
That's insane. Yeah. And so it's a very impressive part. Basically, you guys were also mentioning earlier about real estate. You guys are looking at real estate on you as you're moving forward, and you need to move forward quickly.
So I don't know if it's absolutely necessary for the people that we know in our subset, but maybe others in the configuration that we use, we do not have onboard diluent.
Right.
We only exclusively run offboard diluent.
Right.
The 3 liter or the 50 is an inflation bottle. It's air in that bottle. And then you got oxygen, of course, and then you have your primary bailouts, which are 120 press steels, and those are your diluent supply. You're tied in through a QC into that.
Right.
I only say that as a point of clarification because later someone might be lost when they hear him talking about how he's going to configure.
Right.
They're like, what the hell? What happened to your dill?
And our stage bottles that are usually very far back in the cave, not where our open circuit support divers, would be a stage with an LP hose, a gauge, and a QC. And in our pocket, we'll keep a second stage with a female QC. So any one of those bottles could be second stage adaptable, but not every bottle has a second stage on it, because we all know when you go to a bottle that's been in a cave for 3 months, what's the one thing that's going to fail more than anything when you turn it on? Second stage.
Yeah.
So, but those but now, with this type of technology, we're leaving that behind. The learning curve is huge. The learning curve is here for me.
I interrupted you. I apologize, but I just want to make sure we clarified, because that's also why I did the configuration I did when I ran this as a primary unit, right? We're not going to dig into that, but it's also 13 cubic feet of inflation gas. It ain't getting you done.
No.
Yeah.
And so I don't think we've talked a little about kind of what are the logistics involved with like a dives like a Wiki Watchy. Like, what does that site look like?
Bob?
I am generally the on-surface chump, right? when I'm not getting to dive, and even when I do get to dive.
Oh, no.
So if you mean like, so we all like roll in at 7:30 in the morning sort of thing?
No, not like the
how do
planning.
we set it all up?
Who's doing
idea?
breakfast? Who brought coffee? No.
No, I know you don't want that. We're not.
That's later. That's another episode.
Just give me the baby. Forget the labor pains. But typically you'll have a setup dive. Someone will show up. That's the early guy that gets there, and they just go up and down the tube. The tube starts at 18 feet for easy numbers.
How big is the tube?
Size of a 50-gallon trash can.
Okay.
It's a tube that you can't get down in side mount, but you can get down in back mount. Egg.
How often does that happen? Yeah.
It's rare. But in this particular case.
My favorite is when people don't believe you. When you tell them that, what you just said.
We've had very small female divers, small individuals in side mounts.
Yeah. And then they come up. We're really nice about it.
And it's Superman too. So in back mount, you have to go like that. There's no putting your arms down at your side.
Okay.
So you do a setup dive, right up and down the tube. Barney has an awesome video. I actually used it on the KUR page where he does a selfie video of going up and down the tube. So anyway, you do a setup, and it's usually, depending on if it's two guys, it could be 3 or 4 times each up and down the tube, and that takes 45 minutes to an hour if I'm cracking the whip. How
deep is it into it's like a dressing room?
40 feet fitting room. Correct.
Yeah. We got 18 at the top, 40 at the bottom, and then you pop in the room, and then you got to set the bottles in the right spot. Right. God forbid Gary Donahue's on there, and then them damn bottles better be right where
if they're an inch over.
He's breaking out the ruler. So you do the setup, and then the primary dive team goes in. There's a person on the bottom or that follows them down and makes sure they push off okay. The push off time is actually when the dive kind of starts.
So the push off, that's when the team just
20 minutes typically after the last guy leaves the surface, the team pushes off. Give or take a few minutes, right? And that's when we kind of start.
And in addition to that, they got to make sure the habitat's fun, because the habitat's always there about 4 to 5 feet away, and that's a bailout too. When you've got multiple people in a cavern and reduced visibility, not to mention.
Sure, it gets crowded.
Yeah, not to mention now on top of that.
This is no problem for us.
Right. I mean, he's got to understand how the other side mount bailouts work. When we start implementing this piece of equipment, because it gets real silty. I mean, there's so many times now, they've already put equipment hundreds of feet out, scooters and things, so our setup divers have to have literally intimate knowledge of all of our working systems, because they're there a lot of times going, hey, wait a minute.
Brett calls it the master preener, right? It's just preening of it. It's like a cleaner.
I hear a bubble.
That's how set up for spacesuits are for the EMUs for training. I mean, it takes them an hour and a half to get ready, but they have an entire team dedicated to suiting them up.
Sure.
Because you need to save your energy for the push or for the dive.
Yeah.
And so you have that setup, and then you have
so that's the setup, right? And then you got somebody that babysits them at the push off,
right?
And that's usually the guy that comes smoking up to the surface and said, "I need a stat, right? Something broke."
And the push off doesn't start in the fitting room. Usually,
you do a little duck under, and then
the scooters are about 100 feet out, and there's another diver that follows us out to there.
So then away they go, and then the coordination after that becomes. Typically, depending on the type of dive, if there's cameras involved or the length, we may have a meet and greet is what we call it, where they may want to go out and meet the deep team. And there's a target spot that they want to meet and a target time. But read those questions.
Oh, no, I was just going to remind anybody, if you'd like to see examples of what we're talking about, just go to Andy Pitkin Vimeo, and we have all the videos there. They're also on KU on Facebook. But a lot of, if you haven't seen some of what we're talking about, just go to Andy Pitkin Vimeo, and you can scroll down and look.
He's got tons of videos. Barnett has probably decidedly more surface video than what Doc does.
So
Andy.
In case you're tuning in and not knowing what we're discussing.
That, and then they're fading in and out. I can see the numbers. And then the meet and greet doesn't always happen, meaning we may not even schedule it. You may have some bottles that need to go out to what's called the fracture and the fissure. Right. The fracture and the fissure are two of the same spots. Essentially, one's the top is the fracture, one's the bottom is the fissure. One's at 70, one's at about 130. Right. So different material goes in those two spots, and they're only about maybe 150 linear feet, right? Yeah. I'm not going to talk about that.
Oh, no.
I'm not talking about that. I let that go, man. So you got those two different things that you put in there, depending on what they need. And then assuming everything goes smooth, you've maybe done the meet and greet where they bring out scooters, because the last 2,000 feet, you're not really on the scooter trigger much. So we'll bring out the scooters. And then you do a cleanup. And the cleanup, typically, the way it works is, about whatever your dive time is, about half of that, you should be in a habitat. Rough numbers, right? So 10-hour dive, about 5 hours, you're in the habitat. And the cleanup team will go down and they'll bring up everything not needed. Anything left should be able to get brought up by the final guys in the water, meaning the dive team, right? And then depending on how long the deco is and how bored the people are on the surface, they may come down and check on you. Right. They've even been known to bring pizza.
Oh,
I'm just saying for the surface support team that might be out there, it's happened before, right?
It sounds complicated, but once again, it's a progressive
thing. We have the routine.
All of our divers get really familiar with the top half of the cave out to the beach and the room, and we don't start task loading anybody. And
there's a comfort level.
And the most dangerous part of that cave is the entrance. I tell everybody, I go, forget about 300 and 400 feet in this. I go, water has, it's a non-forgivable media. Right. If anything bad is going to happen, it's going to happen right here in this entrance chimney. So, sometimes people get so focused on the cave, they forget that it starts right there.
The cave starts.
We've all had our close calls.
The cave starts at 18 feet of water.
Twice in that chimney, I'll be on a CCR coming up and also, and I'm just sitting there with a mouthpiece in my mouth and go,
oh no!
Oh yeah! And you're kind of like, panic? No panic. So you're trying to fish for a bottle.
We talked about this a little bit before. I think the majority of us now go in feet first, right? I mean, do you?
Yeah.
So I wish we could share a picture of how it
looks. Like Travis was worth a damn. He'd have this up already.
Yeah, I know.
But we've all gone down head first. Yeah. But the majority of us has transitioned to go down this solution to feet first. And the reason is,
how much weight?
Easier to manage. 30-ish pounds.
30 pounds.
Yeah. So it's easier to manage. You have a bottle over your head that supplies your QC6, which is the same thing we use on everything, right? And that has a second stage hanging in your face, and then you have your BOV in your mouth. And if the worst happens, it's right there.
Yeah, right, and you can, if the worst happens, you can just disconnect that weight.
Yeah,
you're out.
Come back
it's
out.
So much easier to climb out than to back out.
Andy's very holistic. A lot of guys.
That's a good point.
Yeah. I'm bringing my 50s. Some of our explorations, Charlie and Matt and Andy still wear their 3s and they'll go head down. But the dives are so long, you get squeezed because when you get in that chimney, you're going to 40 feet with no suit inflation. Yeah. You get down there, you feel like
you inflate, pastry.
You're crushed by the suit.
You get crushed.
I don't like the way it starts anymore. I mean, I don't care. Anybody who knows me knows I've been stuck and I don't want to get stuck again ever. Not my favorite place to be.
It only takes once to learn.
I never like going down head first, even though I have and still do on setup. But it's not my.
There's no options going head first, but some people still do. Anyways.
So and then even just down the road from Wiki, there's you have a cave Eagle's Nest. Yeah. And that's another site that you guys have been doing some work on. Some people have done some really incredible work on there. I think like Frank McNamara has done some awesome work there. And and a lot of other people.
We're utilizing side mount CCR there more than, we really haven't utilized side mount CCR at Wiki.
Or at Eagle's Nest.
Eagle's Nest.
No. At Wiki, we haven't needed the side mount unit for exploration.
Yeah. Except we are using it for bailout. We did this last year. Yeah. But at Eagle's Nest, we're using side mount CCR for exploration. And so it's systems more than it used to be. It's not something we go around and tell people, oh, Eagle's Nest is getting bigger. I mean, it is, but it isn't. The places back there just aren't formidable. It's not like big open passages.
No, the part where the fun is being had is nowhere at all reflective of the first 1,000 feet in either direction.
It's just
do what I call force the fun a little bit.
Exactly. Definitely. Type 2 underwater deep cave fun, right? It's not. It
becomes more tactical than relaxing. Yes. How do I get to the next 5 feet?
So kind of like to kind of bring the discussion kind of down towards a little bit of a close. So what is the kind of the future? We haven't even started
talking about.
I know. I mean, well, there's so much to talk about, but what's the kind of the future look like in the type of diving that you guys are going to be doing?
The future better have some damn rain.
Yeah, well, we had a hurricane blow through this week, so that's a start in one direction.
We're going to have great diving coming up. Though.
Yeah, I think I got high hopes. Yeah,
I think the future is really once again implementing side mount bailout. Mm-hmm. But once again, doing it in such a way, it's going to take some time. You discussed our habitat. There was always a progression to anything we've adapted, whether or not it's side mounting this or creating habitats for, or even the habitats themselves. And I think, once again, we've implemented side mount bailout. But I think, moving forward, at least it's my plan and Bob's plan this year to implement this design. Once again, it's getting used to it. It's not trusting it, but it's more or less trusting confidence. Yourself.
A lot of it. What I tell everybody is confidence in the equipment that you're using.
But just to constantly, because Derek Ferguson had a loop failure at Wiki. Great diver, wasn't his fault. He was dragging equipment and just really got on the ceiling. And afterwards, Derek called me. He goes, I had a loop failure. I scraped it. And he's like, he was so angry. I go, that's great. I go, you survived a loop failure. You've learned something.
That's a bad thing to happen.
Right. Yeah. But think about this. He did what he did. He got out of the cave. It's not loop failure to that magnitude. It's not something you can practice in a pool, or you want to.
Yeah, it's
and he goes, practice. I never thought about it that way, and he kept diving, But once again, progression, with these types of units, and especially for me, because I started out doing big dives on open circuit, and I'm having to let go, but it's going to have to be relative to how. Not trust. I don't know. What's the word I'm looking for?
No, I think Joe's right. I think Joe's just confidence and understanding of the unit.
Yeah.
And then how will it function relative to how you want it to function?
It's a good example. Will it do what you want? Right. I haven't had an opportunity. I mean, I've used the side mount CCRs that we're using now, but, often like Andy and Charlie, they'll be coming out and they'll go to the unit. It's just invaluable for them. I mean, here's a good example also, waiting for a bailout scenario to happen, to use a bailout rebreather is a very bad idea.
Right.
If you're coming out on a dive and everything's in control, go to your bailout. I mean, it makes sense to me.
I put, 20 some minutes on it the other day when I used it. I was partially trying on the topic that we're supposed to be discussing, and not all of our other fun stuff. But I was like, how do we manage this? And there was a little bit in those directions. Again, not the reference that was about managing it. Like you hit it at 5 meters, I think it was, and then every 10, 20 meters after that. Or 20,
yeah.
So and I did something similar to that, but I just wanted to stay on the loop occasionally to make sure that it maintained breathable gas, right? Mm-hmm. And I also wanted to get it so that I could understand how it was going to do its buoyancy, right? Because
how's the unit going to act?
Yeah, right. And it, all those things worked fine. You just grab it right up because I had it clipped on the chest, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just put it right, pulled my BOV down, and put that one in my mouth and breathed it for a few minutes. And this was on a swim, and you got to get an idea how it worked, and it worked fine. Breathed fine, worked fine. Computer said what it was supposed to say. Yeah. Everything. No issues. Yeah. I think that the different viable units that we have are the ones we played with, like the RB80, right? Mm-hmm. And this one, they're just different. They accomplish the same thing in a different method.
That's different manner, right?
And for me, why we've discussed this. I picked this one because it most reflects what I have, thousands of hours on. This thing just is familiar to me.
Right.
And RB80 is not as familiar to me as this is.
Right.
And when the proverbial shit hits the fan, I'm going to want to go to familiarity.
Right. Of course.
Yeah. And then obviously I dive this in standard side mount configuration. So that only adds to the familiarity of the unit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which
that's my favorite thing is the modularity.
And I don't want to segue because there's certain things I know we still want to cover, but I thought about the other day bailing out, what are the failures you're talking about? Mm-hmm. Like maybe a sensor failure would have to be pretty bad for me to bail out. Mm-hmm. So here's a good example. Let's just say I've lost 2 sensors on my unit, or I'm to the point where I really, even with 3, I'm not being able to differentiate. I'm going to want to bail out. But But 90% of the time, if I have to, heavens forbid, it's going to be a flooded unit. I've never experienced, well, that's not true. I've experienced the KISS in a complete flood because of something I did wrong one time. But I tell you, when you flood another rebreather, that's a whole nother coping mechanism that you don't take into consideration. I mean, you start using your suit a lot more, and stuff. And so you think about those. Think about those things too. It's not just about bailing out to this. It's about coping with another unit that's on your back that could be significantly negative.
A big dead body on you. Yeah, a big heavy body. A big
Yeah, when I had that bailout scenario with Eagle's Nest, it was a total unit flood. Not like, but I mean like total unit flood. Can, loop, everything. And yeah, I mean, you're managing it and you're like, wow, this sucks. It's like dragging a sail through the water.
Right, right.
You have to compensate for that. And then, you're all bigger. And I was with Gary and he's like, why were you scootering so slow? I figured it was a nice dive. I'm only bailed out at, 1,000 feet back. I figured we'd just enjoy it. Or that's as fast as I can freaking go.
Yeah.
But I'm excited about it. Like the future of the projects. Brett and I were chatting about it yesterday. I don't have the exact same opinion that it totally changes the amount of open circuit gas that we do because
I felt the same way. It's okay. You'll get over it.
Because there's other things that occur in the cave, right? We're not the only ones in the cave, the push team. So I don't look at it like we don't need to put those other ones in there, right?
Right.
Plus, it's just too easy to put it in and then take it out 6 months later, right?
Yeah.
But I think that the immeasurable safety that it adds, and then the ability to be able to pass it off and then have the unit, I think I'm excited from the concept of like the Mount Doom dive we talked about, right?
Sure.
So yeah, you got 180 there plus our 120s, and you got 180 at Mount Doom, and then the other one's about 1,500 feet, which doesn't sound very far until you need it, right?
Until you get it,
then it might as well be 15,000 feet away. And having this, you go, hey. That's like little snuggie.
One day you're gonna have a show based on complacency for using a bailout CCR.
Oh yeah. That's coming. Give us like 3 hours each, and then we'll be experts.
Because that's the opposite now. When on the dives I've been on, we're like 1,000, 2,000, 3,000. I'm like, I can see. I'm like, you want to check that rebreather? I'm like, and underwater. I mean, we have to have new hands.
Oh, you're watching.
Did you check the CCR? Because I don't know. Which is another reason. I was telling guys, I was like, I got to carry my own. I'm going to carry my own, and stuff. So, because I really trust those guys, but.
Yeah,
right.
You're right.
Yeah.
You never know.
Yeah.
And just on what will happen.
I'm not gonna lie. I'd let Corilla Gary carry mine.
Yeah.
So I know those guys.
They're buttoned up.
Yeah. That's right.
We talked a little bit. You mentioned it earlier. So the transition from failure to bailout rebreather, is that something we can talk about now?
Definitely.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
I don't want to go
from
off
the
script.
failure to your back mount.
It's over the years. I have a lot of friends that do deep wreck diving and stuff like that, and because they're even with long decompressions, the vertical escape is puts them in a whole different mindset, and so we were talking the other night, if you lose the loop on your primary CCR and you're ready to bail out, my concern, and I mentioned this to you, is that as we move forward with this type of bailout technology, that people are going to be going from their primary loop directly. There's going to be this disconnect where some instructor or instructors along the way are going to have to say, hey, there's a protocol. If you're going to go to that bailout rebreather during an emergency.
And the kind of people that are doing this kind of diving, I mean, where's the training for it right now?
Yeah.
Right now, it's essentially you learn how to use the unit and then you just add it. Right.
So, but are you saying go to?
Well, here's my other thing. We still have divers that are just using. We're having divers that are just using a DSV. If they lose their unit, in some cases, they go to open circuit, or if it's on a lanyard on the show, they go to open circuit. Then they got to go to bailout. Those divers, I think, are going to be more compelled to go DSV loop failure, bailout rebreather. So once again, there's a mindset and a training process there. And I think as we move forward, they're going to go, oh, I don't need to go. And
it's great that you're pushing because this is something we talked about in the bailout series, is that how important is a BOV now? And I think a BOV is becoming more critical with usage of dual units, because like if you have a DSV, you go to a necklace and then you go to another loop,
Sure.
right? Or you have those folks that are diving with 2 side mount units. They go DSV to DSV, but you still need to have that second stage accessible because
we've already admitted the highest probability of compromising this unit is when you're crossing over to
exactly. It's the transition, and you need that rapid transition. If anyone that's had a caustic, a real caustic, you know that you need gas fast, and a rebreather's not going to give you that
no, you need
immediate gratification.
You need the feeling of
oh, thank God! And it's like it's a cleansing.
That's a blast of cold air.
Exactly.
And so
no, I think that, you know, in my mind, if you were in a scenario, the automatically, and having had to bail out, right, automatically, you just go to open circuit. It's like just, in my mind, it's just instinctual, right?
Go to open circuit, and then the next thing is be aware of your environment.
Yeah, right.
As in any bailout, or if you even an open circuit, you know, I've been in so many situations where guys have an open circuit failure and immediately try to manage the failure. And they realize suddenly they're not on the line. Or, you know, once again, a good friend of mine, Bill, we were way back in the beach. He had the brass necks on the old Poseidons.
Yeah.
And he went like this. And what he didn't know is he was moving further and further away from the line instead of boom, line, wrap the leg or whatever, and then manage the air loss, you know. I mean, so if you lose your primary CCR, bail out, environment,
boom, you're already on the circuit. Yeah,
crossing over to this unit. Once again, that does apply more to cave diving, and wreck divers or deep ocean divers might say, "Well, it just doesn't apply to me," you know. And I'm not,
and that's something they got to gauge to themselves.
Not ignorant. They're all very kind of like, we don't do it that way.
Wreck divers.
Yeah, we don't need to do it that way. You know,
I got my lobster bits.
Oh, hey, well, I've got a lot of incredible wreck divers, but you know. But anyways, I mean, the obligation for decompression never fails. But so transitioning from primary to that, if you both have them. So how does the transition from failure of primary unit to bailout CCR happen when it's and so do we even support this? Do we even support this? Yeah. A team bailout CCR, a 2-man team. I tell you, you look at some of our old training standards. How about a 3-man team, 10,000 feet out with 1 bailout CCR? Is that acceptable?
Yeah.
Is it? I don't know.
It's beyond.
I think it's going to happen.
Exactly.
I think it's acceptable if you have all the same open circuit gas that you would have in the first place.
Yeah.
I think that is just another layer, and it's a very manageable layer.
So if we all have big bailout gas and CCRs on our back, 1 bailout CCR for a 3-man team in that situation is. I'm not saying it's not. I'm just saying.
Right. You're saying that this is something we're.
No, just to clarify. Go back to what I said about we set the cave up the same way essentially as if we were doing it with single CCRs, right? You set it up the same way at Wiki. Everything's the same.
And then 1 extra bailout.
Everything's the same as we've done for the last 12 years, except you got another rebreather, right?
Yeah. Once again,
it's the go.
Not to remove the complexity, but yeah.
And I'm not saying it doesn't add a layer, but I think it adds a layer that I can deal with. I'm okay with that.
But does that layer go away when every team member has a bailout CCR? Or does that layer go away when you've done this enough times and have that technology that you're finally ready to go, we don't need that layer anymore?
Here we go.
Now,
let's see.
I think that we'll always
want to see what people's thoughts are if they go down in the comments and they see what, you know.
Tell Hemphill to shut up.
No, I don't think it goes away because I think we have, you know, forever in perpetuity, we're going to have freaking setup divers. And they got to have something to do. Right? Who's going to show up and sit on the surface and drop your crap at the bottom of the freaking...
No. Yeah, absolutely. But I'm just saying, you know...
But these are factors that are going to be going into kind of the discussion.
No, I think things change. Like what you did at the swamp, right? That's a different logistical thing. Let's pretend that you found stuff and it was going and whatever. Yeah. Dude, the advantage to... a bailout rebreather is significant because you're there. It's one time.
Sure.
You're at the site. You got all these reasons that will add advantages. We're talking about a site you can drive your damn car 10 feet from the water. You know,
here's a good example too. Q-tunnel exploration at Wakulla. I mean, there are still tanks and possibly scooters back in Wakulla on the Q-tunnel side from the last dive that Jared did with those guys. Yeah, I mean, because, you know, they were using the gas extenders and they were way out there. They got some stuff out, and you're seeing guys scootering out with 9 bottles behind them and stuff like that. I mean, and they started implementing this type of technology. I mean, I tell you, the BKPP I don't know how much if they actually used it on the big exploration dives, but JJ and those guys were in the process of using sidemount bailout, and I don't know how much it changed the dynamic of their stage, but that's why they even started it, because Q tunnel's still going. It's 27,000 feet out, 280 feet deep. But just breaking down from the last dive, JJ and the guys are like, can't do this. Yeah. We can't find guys to go set us up to 20,000 feet or 18,000 feet. That's and wild. Then so they were trying the big RBs here, and and I don't know if I don't think they ever revisited, but they did have. I think they may have had one or two on that dive, but I don't know. It's just incredible.
A thing. So we talked about failures, and I see somebody threw a question up there that I don't want to ignore, especially because the source. Very sensitive guy. So I referenced earlier that we run suit inflation or inflation gas in total on one bottle on our bag. And the question essentially is, it's about what if you had a failure, right? Uh-huh. Well, that's not the only gas we have. Mm-hmm. And the question that they ask actually references, do you have a way, essentially it's asking, do you have a way to get gas out of your offboard bailout, right? Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Right. And a lot of people go, oh, that's expensive Trimix. Okay, I've got a 50 cubic foot bottle for my suit. And I know in some states the gas I'm diving is $300 a fill, but when you're that far out,
you don't think deep, about it when it is.
You'll work it out.
I've got 2 LP fittings here. I can, and if something bad happens and I got to put Trimix in my suit, I live to see another day. So I'm inflating myself. Yeah, absolutely.
And we also have adapters that go from LP inflators to QC6 males to QC6.
Yeah, I don't. We have them. I don't rely on them, but I've got LP, and then on a 50. So the 50 could go here. So, and they're all tucked away unless they have to be utilized.
I always feel like any gas source, I should be able to get into it, and it should be able to get into my body or into my unit, one way or the other. So it needs to be usable. So any of the stuff that's in the water on my body or wherever I can get to.
If you find gas, you can use it.
But I will say this: our LP hoses are dedicated for wing or suit. Mm-hmm. There was a time when we were doing some adapters for other things, but predominantly if there's a gas used for life support, it's coming through a QC, and so on and so forth. So, shallower gases like oxygen, a little bit different. So cool. For that question.
All right. Well, I think we've kind of pushed through a lot of our time. Yeah, I think so. Well, we definitely need to
by the hour. I got nothing but time.
We're going to need to do another episode coming up soon, where we're going to talk more details about.
I'm sure it will be met with just as much animosity from our friends.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Sure.
Hey, thank you guys all for tuning in. It was a great episode, and we're happy that you guys watched. Be sure to jump in the comments, say hello, and ask any other questions, and I'll make sure these guys jump in and answer them as well.
Yeah, we need to talk about transitional deco, bailing out for the sole purposes of decompressing off.
Well, actually, yeah. Well, I mean,
is there time?
Yeah, of course there's time.
You already shut it down.
Yeah.
Is it shut down?
So transitional deco. So what is this transitional decompression?
So what you would normally be using a bailout CCR during this, and so a lot of people, for us, especially on some of the dives, this is the longest part of our dive, even though this is the entrance, and essentially this is where the actual linear part of the dive begins. The longest part of our dive is happening here. And if you think about it, if you can make it back from being 20,000 feet in a cave, that's great. But if you can't make it from here to here, you're in just as much trouble as you were 20,000 feet out in the cave. And these types of units obviously work in that capacity too. So stagnant or static, leaving a static bailout CCR in a position like this is good too. It could be an environmental situation where maybe it's very small or whatever, Right. It's because I'll tell you what, from here to here, open circuit, that's 5 bottles or more, depending on how much it is. So once again, you're not eliminating these bottles, or are you?
Right. Oh.
If you're leaving a bailout CCR here, and in the diluent source. So something we could talk about later, because I think these are really, once again, and some of the other units that are out there, our decompressions in most cases are the longest part of our dives. And you're underwater. So. You're underwater.
Yeah, you're still in the environment.
Right? You made it back from the cave and you can't make it, you get bent that bad, you're going to die.
Yeah, exactly.
With your Yeah, something to think about.
I mean, it's a great illustration of how of an important part that the unit can be used.
Sure.
That it's going to be extremely valuable because it is still a very big part of the dive.
Oh yeah.
Is that coming back and then coming out of depth?
Yeah, and there's a much higher likelihood of compromising your CCR in this type of environment than in this one. You know, when you're sitting there. So, and of course, open water is much different. I mean, I'll be the first one to say this: open water decompressions, deep wreck diving are so much more difficult.
I think so. Yeah.
Than caving. I mean, those guys have so many challenges: current, life, boats running you over.
You know what I do with a bottle that I'm trying to move around in a cave?
Sure.
If I want, I just set it down.
Yeah, I mean,
you don't get to do that. 300 feet of water, you don't get to do that.
Bob and we were amongst a bunch of our teammates and other people with the not Woods Hole, sorry, Moat Marine. We were literally having to drop a 2,000-pound sampling device into a sinkhole to 380 feet. I mean, it's like woo! It was like, but it's a lot to think about, and the application for this type of technology is. It's going to be happening. It's going to be happening, especially in deep ocean out here in the Gulf. There's so many things that haven't been explored on the Karst Plateau in our Gulf.
I got a call the other day.
Yeah, sinkholes that start at 200 feet deep.
Wow. Yeah.
Lots of stuff.
And like you said, the logistics of open water diving on open ocean. Yeah.
And I'd be so much more comfortable. No, but once again, when I leave this behind on a ledge in whatever mode I've left it on, and now and I'm away from it, my mind is constantly.
I'd be thinking about that, son of a.
Oh, hell yeah. I mean, how often do you have to do it? And then at some point, you go from that hypersensitive mode to complacency. Where's the threshold? I've left it on.
I want to be in the middle.
Right. Yeah. That's kind of where I've tried my best to stay doing these dives. It's not, it'll be fine. It'll be like, just stay the path, stay the course.
And that's a great kind of point to leave everything at, is that we want to be right between that complacent mode and that point where we're too nervous that we're like, I don't feel very comfortable. You have to be where you're alert, where you're confident. Yeah, you're diligent.
Absolutely.
Exactly. And then in all aspects of diving. So.
Yep.
Well, cool. Well, thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
And thank you very much for joining the Dive Talks episode. I think this was a great episode, and we will see you guys next week on Divesoft TV, Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern time here in Florida. And we'll see you next week. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.